But first up for our afternoon, which we're going to do in 3 segments now after lunch, I'd like to introduce Jennifer Brandel, who's the founder and CEO of Hearken, which is a service that helps media outlets and organizations tap into the knowledge of their networks and audiences to identify ideas and to build audience engagement. And I've been talking about how great Hearken is for a long time, and I'm sure misrepresenting it. So I'm looking forward to Jennifer telling us how it actually works. So thank you, Jennifer. Welcome.
Hi, everyone, and thanks so much for having me here. It's a real honor and delight to be in a room with so many of you who I know and so many who I don't know, and I'm looking forward to meeting as well. And just to help you get over the post-lunch food coma, we'll start with a video. And speaking of being stuck in traffic, I want us all to do a little thought experiment here and pretend that you are a Vermonter. You live in this beautiful state of Vermont, and you're either stuck in traffic or you're cooking in your kitchen or whatever, and you have public media on, your Vermont Public Radio, let's say. Maybe you just heard Corva Coleman give a NPR newscast, and then I want you to picture that this comes on the air. So we're going to start with some audio that I put really crappy stock photos to. I think we're going to have to start it over. And if we could start from the top and just start it over, because I think the audio wasn't at the beginning. Cool, thanks.
Okay, here's something that should come as no surprise. Most decisions about the news you hear and read and watch every day are made by somebody else.
Right. Editors assign stories, reporters report stories, producers put them all together.
But what if you could make some of those decisions?
Yeah, what if you could shape the stories before they're even assigned and change the way journalism happens?
Welcome to Brave Little State.
My name is Roger Bombardier, Jr. of Richmond, Vermont, and I have some questions.
I'm Michelle Payton, and I'm a hospice nurse down in Pittsford, Vermont.
My name is Will, and I'm from Colchester.
I'm Megan Perkins, and I live in Burlington, Vermont.
My name is Bill Morris, and my question is, what was Vermont like without trees?
Brave Little State is a new podcast from Vermont Public Radio.
It's hosted by me, Angela Evansy.
And also me, Alex Keefe.
But it's driven almost entirely by you, our listeners.
We want to know what you want to know.
Specifically, what question do you have about Vermont, our region, or its people that you want VPR to investigate?
Why are our utility bills so high in Vermont?
What's with the high occurrence of embezzlement cases that we see in Vermont?
What is that bizarre thing at the Waterbury rest area?
There's no question too serious.
Why aren't the doctors being called out for their role in this addiction issue?
There's no question too unserious.
Does Vermont really still have more cows than people? How is that possible?
Okay, so hopefully as you're sitting there in your car or your kitchen, suddenly you feel like you could jump to the other side of the radio. Maybe you feel like you have questions that you've always wanted to have a journalist answer, and maybe you feel like you could have your 15 minutes of fame on your favorite media station. So this is something that's happening at Vermont Public Radio, and my goal is to make this happen all over the country at public radio stations everywhere, for listeners to be able to hear themselves reflected in the coverage, for them to be able to participate and drive that coverage that really animates and delights their local community. And so Brave Little State is powered by Hearken, which is the company I'm going to tell you more about that I run now. But just in short, to give you a brief preview, the word itself you've probably heard in Christmas songs, but it means listen. And we are here to help news organizations listen to the public as a story develops way before publication, so from the pitch process and on. And the model that we've developed is called public-powered journalism, because without the public, these stories just don't get made at all. And so I want to give you a quick backstory as to how this came about. It actually came out of public radio. So I was a University of Wisconsin grad. I'm glad to see there's a lot of Badgers in the room here. I went to WBEZ, started off as a reporter there, and there were some things that kind of bothered me about the process. One of which is I was attracted to public media for its mission of serving the public. But this little piece from the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967 actually encapsulates some of the things that were bothering me. So it says public media will be responsive to the interests of the people and address their needs of unserved and underserved audiences. And so as a reporter, I was always asking myself, so, okay, that sounds great. So how are we being responsive exactly? And how do we know what their interests are and what information they're actually looking for? And then how can we address the needs of the people who are not at the editorial table where decisions are being made? Because frankly, this is not a secret, but most media companies don't represent the public that they're looking to serve demographically, social, class-wise, income, all of those things. So how do we make sure that we can bring in those perspectives at the moment where they actually matter when decisions are made? And so what I was able to do, thanks in part to a lot of the funders in the room, Wyncote Foundation, the CPB, AIR, et cetera, was I was able to experiment with answering these questions. And I did so through a series I started at WBEZ called Curious City, which is a play on the word curiosity. I'm going to tell you about how it worked. So really what we learned is that trying to get answers to these questions of how do we be more responsive, how do we be more representative, couldn't happen without changing the process of journalism. So the very processes that create stories are actually closed. They're unresponsive and they're unrepresentative. And that's in part because the public doesn't come into play until it's too late. So after stories are published or broadcast, that's when they're allowed to say, hey, you should have interviewed so-and-so, or I wish you would have done this angle, or I have an idea. And once a story is published, the journalist is running on to their next story. They don't have the opportunity to learn from one another, to grow, to evolve, to shape the coverage. And so this was a big problem that we found, is that we couldn't have representation with the traditional way that stories were made. And so we really hacked the process. We created a new way of bringing the public in at all the key decision-making points of creating a story. And what we did is we created it at each big phase. So at the pitch phase, it was about taking the audience's questions. What information don't they have that they would like a journalist to spend time getting answers to? And then at the assignment phase, we would curate the best questions and let the public ultimately vote on our coverage. And the third phase, this was my favorite part as a reporter, is actually working with the person whose question we were answering to be part of the story in some meaningful way. So to have their voice on the air, to have, sometimes they were even the protagonist of the piece and the main character. And so we ended up being able to bring the public along really at every point of the process. And what we learned is everything got better. Absolutely everything got better. And so, some of the questions that people had, you might wonder, oh, are people going to ask for cat videos or Kardashian baby photos? No, they're not. They have amazing questions that have real journalistic integrity and value. And these are just some of the questions that came into WBEZ and Curious City that we did stories on. Questions that a lot of people have either wondered before, or if they didn't wonder, once they were introduced to the curiosity, they had to know the answer because it was such an interesting question. But one of the things we ran into is that we found people were asking questions from our core audience. So in public media, a lot of times it tends to be people who live in more affluent parts of town, have more resources, et cetera. And so we collected all the zip codes from the people who were asking questions and actually mapped them out. And we found we were not representing our community as well as we wanted to, as well as public media tells us that we should and that we all want to. So what we did is we intentionally went out into those communities that we weren't serving and gathered questions from places. And we worked a lot with public libraries, who turned out to be a really wonderful collaborator in that. Digital didn't work as well as in person. Go figure. So this is one of the things that we addressed with this project as well. And one of the amazing things we found is that these stories performed so much better than our other stories. So not only were they more original and interesting and had a different feel, but they just kicked ass on every platform. So in 2014, even though just 2% of the stories posted to our site were made through this public-powered process, they accounted for 41% of the top 50 stories. And they continue to be blockbuster top stories of the week, top stories of the year, et cetera, that come in through this process. So not only was it like unique content, but really high-performing as well. And then the other great thing is that we're seeing ties to revenue. So we collected people's email addresses when they asked questions because we wanted to get in touch, involve them, et cetera. And so just in the first year, we had collected more than 10,000 email addresses. Most of them were not members of that public media station yet. So this is straight up member acquisition, user acquisition type of thing that can happen. And then we also found that sponsors really wanted to be associated with this content because it came from the community, it was responsive, it was interesting and accessible, and so we could get good sponsorship as well. And these stories continue to win awards. So investigative journalism awards, innovation awards, the public participating does not dumb anything down. In fact, it makes everything much better. And so in 2015, I started hearing from a lot of other public media newsrooms who were saying, we love this, how do we do it? How do we make this happen in our shop? And I just didn't have the time and capacity to figure out how to scale the model while I was reporting and producing. And so I did the hard thing. I quit my dream job at WBEZ, producing these stories and working with the community to figure out how to scale the model. And so Hearken is this company that we're now scaling the model with media organizations all over the world. And so we have developed a platform to make it much easier for news organizations to do this work. At every step of the way, they can collect questions, have it all tidy in an online platform. And then our subscription also includes consulting as well, because we realize technology isn't the solution for the next generation of media. It's really a mindset shift. And so we're helping newsrooms think differently about their relationship with the public. In terms of how we've grown, just 2 years ago, we had 3 newsrooms working with us. Now we're in 18 languages in 14 countries around the world, including with folks here. It's fun to see our stuff in other languages. There was a language I never heard of called Hausa that we're in now. Very exciting. And then what we're finding is just this engagement leads to better everything. So these stories are original, relevant, they're popular. They end up performing much better than other stories. So it's not just at WBEZ, this is happening everywhere. We're also seeing that this can lead to revenue. So our partners, Bitch Media, which have a membership model, they just recently found that their Hearken stories, or their readers who engage with Hearken, are 5 times more likely to become paying subscribers. And then they can get much bigger ad rates as well. So engagement isn't just a nice to have, it can be mission critical for the bottom line. And stepping back big picture, this is about creating a new way of making journalism. So you have your reactive news stories, your press initiated, now you can have public initiated stories. And when you do that, you can actually let the public help solve their own problems and find amazing things in their community and take action. So I'll give you just a couple quick examples. In Nashville, our partners at WPLN, someone wanted to know about the origin of a park name called Fred Douglass Park. Who's Fred Douglass? Because if he's that famous for a park, we should know who he is. Well, it turns out it was supposed to be Frederick Douglass Park, but it was an 80-year-old racist slight that caused it to be truncated and misspelled. And so City Council ended up voting to change it to Frederick Douglass Park because just a regular person had a question and the newsroom got involved. And then in Chicago at WBEZ, this woman, Janice, wanted to know how much of her electricity comes through fracking. And because we involved her along the way, we taught her what we were finding, she was involved, she ended up quitting her job to become an energy educator in the community about sustainable electricity choices. So these are the kinds of things that can happen when you give the public access to the power that journalists have. And so the value follows at every step of the way when you change your process to bring the public along. And so what we're finding right now, kind of what we're working on next, is we are working to scale to more media companies. We're finding a lot of the nonprofit local media are very price sensitive, of course, and we're providing a lot of value, a lot of training, a lot of consulting and culture change. And so we're raising a subsidy fund right now to help those small nonprofits pay for the service in year 1 and 2 so that they can end up having access to this different way of relating to their audience that will hopefully help them stay sustainable into the future. So if you're interested in talking more about that, I'll be around the rest of the day. So anyway, that was a lot. I talked fast, sorry about that. But we're out of time, and thank you so much for your attention. Thanks.